Do you have a month-end close process? Who's currently recording the transactions? Who's reviewing those books? Are you reviewing those books? Are you tracking by job?
Welcome to Builders, Budgets, and Beers. I'm Reece Barnes, and I started this podcast to have real conversations about money in the building industry, the wins, the mistakes, and everything in between. I believe builders deserve to feel confident about their finances, and that starts by hearing from others who've been through it too. This industry can be slow to change, but the right stories and the right tools can make profitability feel possible. Let's get into it. All right, Chris, mics are hot. We're rolling. Thanks for coming on the show, dude.
My pleasure, man. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Okay, well, as always, let's give the listeners a little background on our guest. Chris, tell the people who you are, what your background is, what you do. We'll just start there.
Yeah. So, classically trained accountant, bachelor's in accounting way back in 2012.
Does classically trained mean like Mozart? You're like a Beethoven guy?
Yeah. No, just the typical bachelor's, I guess.
Yeah.
So started off as a CPA generalist for about the first 5-6 years, audit, tax, consulting in various industries. So the back half of my career to this point has been in outsourcing, or as like the industry likes to call it, CAAS.
What does CAAS stand for?
Client Accounting and Advisory Services.
Okay,
so
beautiful.
Otherwise known as bookkeeping, accounting, consulting. Totally. The profession wanted to rebrand, right?
Yep, sure.
So it's interesting when I look back to the background, dabbled in construction here and there, up until about a couple of years ago when I got tapped in at a top 10 firm to lead one of their 3 national regions for construction outsourcing, and fell in love with the industry, coupled with a lot of great tools that have come out on the market, and so not too long ago, basically quit my corporate job in October, took some time off, and went off on my own, bootstrapping my own client accounting and advisory services firm for exclusive to construction contractors. So
I love it. Okay, so really stout background. And look at you just humbly slipping in a little top 10 accounting firm experience. But you mentioned you fell in love with the industry. You didn't come from the industry.
Yeah.
You just kind of dabbled in it. Why did you fall in love with construction accounting? It's like the most brutal form of accounting. What do you love about it?
Yeah. The one thing I look back on, trying to stay humble here, some industries from an accounting perspective are easier than others. And in my experience, construction can get complicated pretty quickly. And, where I've gravitated in my career is I'm drawn to challenges, and it's that's one aspect. And then the blue collar nature of the clientele, being a no BS and down to earth guy, myself, I think I can identify with the
salt of the earth folk.
Amen. Yeah.
Soats as they're called in some parts of the country. SOTEs.
I like it.
Okay, so you fell in love with like the tangible, the grittiness, the direct nature of the industry.
Yeah. And honestly, not being handy myself, how I can bring my unique skill set to help the industry. I think I can do a lot of good and bring a lot of value. And so that's kind of what's brought us here, man. Yeah.
Totally. No, I love it. Okay. And that's great. I mean, I similarly have that background. I was like, I wasn't a hammer swinger or a bags on kind of guy. Wait, what are you sipping on here? What are you sipping on?
do not endorse it. Accelerator. I get it off
Accelerator.
Amazon. So 200 milligrams of caffeine.
There you
Um,
go. Just get a little zip in your step to start the day. I didn't know if you were drinking a beer. I didn't know if you were drinking a beer on
no,
Budgets
I've
and Beers.
been, as an avid listener of your podcast, I know we've kind of strayed from that theme in the name,
I know.
which is all good. But
I know.
um,
It's just it was too much. It was too
yeah,
much to organize and line up. And it was like as much as I love, beers around the noon hour,
yeah,
it just hasn't happened. It just hasn't happened that way. But okay, so anyway, so you loved the industry.
yeah,
You loved working with these types of people.
yeah,
You're bootstrapping your own company. Tell
yeah.
me a little bit about that and what drove. I mean, obviously you love the industry and you love the space, but what was the opportunity that you saw? Like, what are you actually providing from a service standpoint?
Yeah.
And where do you see gaps and opportunities for this industry to get better that you hopefully solve?
Yeah, so I think it all started when, I was gifted a vision, and I think
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the guests you've had, I never saw myself as an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
Never thought I was going to go into business on my own, though that is not an uncommon path for folks in accounting, right?
Totally.
Um, and I had a vision, I couldn't shake it, about, how to help 0 to 50 uh, employee construction companies.
Yeah.
Um, coupled with the great tools that are on the market, add on a lot of these folks can use some help, and I think I'm just the guy to do it. So a lot of folks who go off on their own, the easy path is they stay solo, but I've led teams and I have every intention of building a team around me.
Mm-hmm.
And the market will dictate how far we take this, you know.
Totally.
Um, so yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, and so you've obviously, I mean, you've got the corporate background, you've got the entrepreneurial itch here.
Mhm.
Tell me how you see construction accounting just being viewed generally in the
Yeah.
industry and specifically in businesses. What are you seeing from the fine contractors of America, as we
And
say?
yeah, yeah, yeah. So the I think what comes top of mind, Reese, is um, honestly, I've seen in practice how having the wrong people in the accounting and bookkeeping seat, can wreak some havoc
Mm-hmm.
in a business. I think, there's folks who understand that the bookkeeping and accounting is a trade similar to an electrician, to a plumber, who give it the respect it deserves,
Mm-hmm.
and others who, want to take that risk. And uh, whether it's an office manager or somebody's wife, to which is very typical, right?
Mm-hmm. Totally.
To wear that hat and to get good at it. Hey, I've seen some folks who can do it,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But the way I look at it, again, I come from a little bit of a bias, right? Coming from the
Of
accounting
course.
finance world. Uh, the way I see it is, way back when I was networking with a financial advisor, and um, they said that, which always stuck with me, that the riskiest thing you can do with your money is open a business. And
Interesting. Okay. Makes
you
sense.
know, coming from like the fractional controller, CFO, coming from the accounting world, which is typically very we're not known as risk takers, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's one reason why we tend to be trusted advisors to
Mm-hmm.
um, our entrepreneurs who are the risk takers,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we balance them out. So in my mind, there's enough risk in going off and starting an enterprise that, why don't we hedge some of that risk in who we're hiring and be diligent in who we're putting in that seat, who's the bookkeeper, the accountant,
Yeah.
um, who's giving you your numbers. Um, so the other thing, I think we're coming up on Mother's Day,
Yeah.
I was thinking about, a nice little tagline, but I think it's a little too salesy, so,
Yeah. You
the,
got to float it out there. You got to float
yeah,
it.
I'll float it out
Yeah.
there. I'll test it
Yeah.
out on
Yeah.
you guys, bootstrapping here. So um, we've all heard the marriage vows to have and to hold,
Of course.
never have I heard vows that say, and to do your bookkeeping
Yeah. Yeah.
for the
Yeah.
rest of your
Exactly.
life. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, hey, listen, some folks really like it, and more power to them,
Hmm.
but, when when part of the motivation to come here and start off on my own and really focus on construction has been, I've seen the strain that, um, this bookkeeping accounting role can have on folks. So, like, top of mind comes from not a client I work directly with, but one of my team members worked on was, a mom with three young kids,
Hmm.
the who was spread really thin. The husband's business was growing like a weed, and the transaction volume got a lot bigger, and she wanted no part of it,
Yeah.
and so, um, I mean, there's a market um, uh, uh, for, what I and, plenty of other competent folks do. So,
Yeah. Totally. Well, and I think even to like bring it back, I mean, I think, how you're articulating this should resonate quite well with contractors in the sense that, you might feel a little biased just considering your corporate background,
mhm,
right? And like obviously you're a believer in the outsourced service provider
mhm,
network because of the expertise, right? And the commitment that you can bring by building a team that's like actually focused and skilled and developed and trained in that field.
sure,
The it makes it like the similarities between hiring a general contractor and hiring an outsourced accounting firm are so similar, right? When you think about this, like of course we've got, you just call it like home builders, right?
mhm,
They have reason to believe and reason to be biased that their product is the best, right? In the market, at least they
yeah,
should believe so, right?
yeah,
And then when you think about, okay, well, what does a GC do? Well, GC is not always out self-performing work, right? Who do they bring to the table? They bring together electricians, plumbers, foundation excavation people, concrete
sure,
folks, right? Roofers, all kinds of different trades. And
mhm,
they're doing the same exact thing in their business. It's not just about looking on Google, who's an electrician? This guy's an electrician. Come in and do the electrical roughing in my house. The general contractor is looking at it and saying, I want to find the best electrician, right?
mhm,
And the person who's buying the home is not going to have any idea how to vet the best electrician, right? That's
sure,
a part of the value that the general contractor is bringing to the table to deliver the best product. So, like,
mhm,
in terms of the opportunity that you're seeing, is you're looking at this same approach. Instead of building a house, you're building healthy books, right?
mhm,
And your job is to go out and evaluate the market and bring them into processes and technology and service delivery as a team with the best people that can be there, right? Like
sure,
that similarity is there. Now, what are you mentioned the story of, the mom, three kids, growing in volume, wants nothing to do with the books anymore. Like that's a pretty like obvious layup for a
yeah,
service provider. Is like the
yeah,
pain is just like screaming at you. You just need to like help them out.
sure.
But how often is that happening? Or I guess, are you seeing the construction industry view outsourced service providers, consultants, CAAS providers, accounting people, stuff like that, through the same lens as they would with their trades or their specialty contractors that are helping them build? Or do you see some resistance there in the market?
It's different, different folks view us differently.
Sure.
I mean, I don't think there's any blanket. I think there are some folks who, um, uh, realize the value, of what we bring to the table.
Mhm.
Going off on one extreme for, a typical example of folks who don't see our value, right?
Mhm.
The contractor who isn't financially sophisticated and doesn't understand. I mean, they might value tax services, right?
Sure.
From when they think of their accountant, it's like, okay, they do my taxes, that's it.
Mhm.
Many of them don't realize, how much cleanup, that tax account is doing to their books before they file the taxes. Some tax accounts are good and
Mm-hmm.
they'll share that. Others, might gatekeep, and the contractor has no clue, what it takes to um, uh, do it right, do the job right, and sorry, real quick
You're good.
to kind of put a pin in that, some folks, they're used to paying like under $1,000 a year to their accountant,
Mm-hmm.
to their tax account, and that's their budget, that's their limit.
Mm-hmm.
And um, they you counter that with folks who value our services, and they're asking great questions
Mm-hmm.
about their finances. You know, a litmus test for me is always, are they challenging me? Is the
Yeah.
client challenging me? Like, oh, that's a great question. Yeah, let's dig in and let's figure that out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, they they're they're using their their financials in making business decisions. Very, very cliche stuff there.
Mm-hmm.
I think your audience has heard that all before, but um, yeah, uh,
One piece I want to dig on, especially with your background in like taxes, and I was I was on a panel in Savannah for
mhm,
um, the Southern Living group, and this was like a part of the conversation. There's essentially like me, and then we had a service provider, bookkeeper, outsourced CFO on the panel, and then we had someone who just focuses purely on taxes. And I totally agree. Like that's where when you think about small business owners, their natural interest in accounting is like towards tax. Correct me where I'm wrong, but it's typically on the emphasis is on tax because that's where they see the savings, right? They're
sure,
like, how can you lessen my taxable burden, right? So I don't
sure,
have to pay all of these taxes, right? And that's like they're focused on the end goal.
yeah,
But to your point of like the amount of cleanup that has to happen and lead up into it was exactly the conversation that we had on this panel, which
yeah,
is like the tax is like call it the finish line, right? Or it's like that's like the deadline.
hmm,
But to really get all of the benefits of like strategic tax execution and just a general tax strategy is all the outcome of repeatable, regular, consistent day-to-day cost and income tracking
sure.
and accounting. what are
Amen.
what are people like when you're saying like there's this resistance or they're looking for tax? How do we get more of this message for the construction industry as a whole to understand that it's really the emphasis needs to be placed on the day-to-day execution of tracking cost and income as
Mhm.
opposed to just looking at the end goal and the outcome of like I want less taxes?
Well, this is part of it. Here we are. We're talking about it. We're leaving our egos at the
Totally.
door and, helping the fine contractors of America with our unique expertise, right? And
Totally.
so getting the message out, I think as information becomes more widely available, folks are tuning in. Um, you know, Younger generation up and coming, tuned into that,
Hmm.
new way of thinking. I
Hmm.
think that's going to be very helpful. Um, and so I think all of us doing our part, I guess, getting that message out. So,
Totally. Well, what are some of like the tactical things that you see contractors missing on in their day
mhm.
to day from just tracking their costs and their income in the business? What are
Yeah,
some things that like when you are going through call it a discovery process with a new prospective client and you mentioned like are they pushing back? I think that's kind of a litmus test that you take, but even just like stuff that the audience can listen to and say that's me or that
mhm.
was me or like I'm glad that I don't do that. Right? What are some things that contractors struggle with just on the day to day that you could potentially fill the gap on?
Sure. I think so I gotten a lot better at sales and over
Okay.
the last few years. And I don't like to call it sales, I might coin a new phrase, value communication, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Consultative selling.
Yeah. And what I learned going into a discovery meeting is don't go in with any preconceived notions.
Yep.
Don't go in with an agenda.
Hmm.
Just be in listening mode.
Hmm.
Dig, find their pain, their
Yep.
unique pain, and speak to that. And sometimes I can help in that pain. Other times it's a referral to somebody else.
Yep.
Um, you know, coming from a top 10 accounting firm, sometimes it wasn't outsourcing that they were needing.
Right.
Maybe there was a better opportunity in to help them in wealth advisory or um, tax planning. Maybe they had a robust internal team already.
Hmm.
So what does trying to think of sometimes the best business is no business, right?
Yeah.
And
Sure.
um,
Or know
and
who you're selling to and what you're selling. Right. That's probably
exactly,
another way to put it.
exactly.
Yeah.
So did that answer your question?
Kind of. I mean, I'm more so. I'm just looking for like the specifics. Like, actually, I could maybe phrase this a little bit differently. Like,
Mhm.
what is probably the most common recurring problem that you hear from prospects, and you're just like, you need me.
Sure.
What are those prospects feeling in their business from a pain standpoint that you're like, I'm your guy?
Sure. So some go-to questions, do you have a month-end close process?
Hmm.
Who's currently recording the transactions? Who's in that
Hmm.
transaction recording seat? Who's reviewing those books? Are you reviewing those books?
Yeah.
Are you tracking by job? I mean, there's a lot of folks still aren't. Um, uh, when you look at the wider construction industry, right? Because it's too burdensome. Uh, uh, so trying to take inventory as best you can because there's the you only get so much of their attention in that discovery meeting. So
Totally.
trying to really cut through the crap and get to, from an accounting, finance, payroll perspective, who are your people? What are your processes?
Yeah.
And systems high level. I've seen enough of system setups and um, uh, different, the wide spectrum of qualified people and processes to identify pretty quickly early on, if we might be able to help. So,
Give me
uh,
an example of that, of like a process with unqualified people.
mhm.
Like, there's got to be someone you just talked to that like stands out.
So a process with unqualified people. Okay. So, I'll get, what I want to share with you, because
This seems
this will be a
juicy.
LinkedIn, this will be a LinkedIn post at
This
some
seems
point.
juicy. Let's hear it. Let's hear it.
This was a contractor. This was the worst payroll process I've ever seen in
Okay.
my career. Um, I believe like super high level, I counted like 6 points of duplicate entry or serious data manipulation in the process.
Okay.
Part digital timekeeping shops on the paper time cards. You
Okay.
know, king king all that, the paper time cards into making the digital uh, one complete.
Okay.
um then doing going down row by row, we're talking about like 200 rows,
Okay.
of time data,
Yeah.
and manually massaging it because where it needs to go to, it needs to go to the paychecks lady,
Yeah.
to and she needs it in a certain format.
Yeah.
And then they get that back. They only get the report. So that payroll, after it's run, it's not connected to their GL.
Okay.
And uh, then they're, uh, one of their top front office folks, uh, is keying in a journal entry to job cost it into their QuickBooks desktop.
Okay.
And one big reason why, Reece, that example stands out to me is they didn't know. They just accepted that's how you do it. And they had a fractional CFO, that they were
Really?
paying like 3K a month. And you know they just took that for granted that that's how they did it. And that's why I like to call it not sales, but value communication, right? Like that was years ago, Reece. And I feel like I failed them because we brought this up to them,
Yeah.
but they didn't bite on, hey, you know, you can have your digital timekeeping. Everybody's in digital timekeeping.
Yeah.
You know, that can flow seamlessly into a construction specific payroll solution.
Yeah.
Hey, we can integrate that with your QuickBooks, you know, at the job cost code level, right?
Yes.
Um, then that's part of one the way my brain thinks, Reece, honestly, is I don't think there's enough of us out there that try to, at these entry level solutions, to think about seamless data flow
Yeah.
between systems. There's a lot of low hanging fruit there that I think a lot of folks aren't taking advantage of. You know, stuff that's easy for me because I live in that realm, have lived in that realm for years.
Totally.
You know, some people are aware of that pain. You know,
Yeah.
some people aren't, and we got to do our best to educate them on that
Totally.
where we can help, right? So,
Totally. So, okay. And okay, let me just because you mentioned like duplicate entries.
mhm.
Obviously, the paper with digital
Yeah,
reconciliation, updating, journal entry, right? Like that sounds painful and brutal. But when there were 6 duplicate entries and it
I think at
wasn't
the
tied back
time
to
that's what I counted. Yeah. Um,
and but then you just think about it like double paying payroll, not subs. Like these are like people that are in your shop or on your
yeah,
sites that you're looking at this, like that is enough to like stand out and break someone,
yeah,
right? I think the biggest it, you can take this approach from like, yeah, it's super easy. We have run the same thing at Adaptive, and general contractors run the same thing when they have like super high quality subs, right? It's like for them, they get it. This is why we use this electrician because they're super, I don't even know, polished. Like their electrical boxes are super tight in and neat and organized and everything looks good. I don't even know what makes a good electrician. When it comes to these processes and systems, though, it's like it can become so clear to you've got this process here in paper, this process in digital. We can consolidate those two. But I think the message is like, why? Why is that important? Because I could be sitting here if I'm building a home and the general contractor is like, oh, we only use these electricians. They're going to be more expensive than everyone in the space, but everything's going to be super organized and put together nicely. And like, it's going to be a really quality finished product. And I'm sitting here saying, I don't really give a shit what
yeah,
my electrical box looks like. Like
yeah,
as long as I can flip on a switch and there's electricity to it, that's what
yeah,
I'm interested in.
yeah.
Right. So then how do you convert those people to get them to understand that like this bloated process
Sure.
is important enough for you to not only hire me, but then
Yeah,
to take action and start applying these things? How do you get that full circle moment to have with these people? Or when they don't get that full circle, what do they say?
yeah. So like some of the value prop, you know, top of mind is okay. Is this person always? What are the chances that person who owns that process is going to own it till your business passes on, you know,
Yeah.
till you close shop or it succeeds to the next generation or you sell it.
Mm-hmm.
So like how transferable are those processes? You know,
Okay.
how
Yeah.
plug and play are they? Because like in this day and age, you know, people come and go from your
Totally.
business. And
Or need to come and go. Or
yeah.
need. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
And like for me personally, like I will never plug me or team member into that process. Shit,
Yeah.
we're cleaning that up, Reece, before we step in there. You
Okay.
know,
Yeah.
because it's low hanging fruit. Because that's one of the great things about working with smaller contractors. It's like these aren't, and you speak a lot about it, you know, from the adaptive front, but I've seen it with other systems too. There's a lot of low risk with implementations, you know,
Yeah.
because there's just not a lot of data. These are entry level systems, they're canned solutions, and it just needs a good operator. At the end of the day, these systems are tools, right?
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
kind of speaks to kind of the specialty. You know,
Yeah.
who's the operator using these tools?
Yeah.
You know, same like your guys in the field and those tools. Like shit, I couldn't use those tools in the field.
Yeah.
Shit, you don't know
Yeah. Yeah.
what kind of work product you'd get. the right butts in the right seats, using the right tools. There's a lot of similarities, right?
Of
So
course. Of course. Okay. So on that front, I think what are like, obviously we talked about like systems. What are the systems that you go for these days?
yeah.
Like what are the
So
top software systems that you go for?
great,
He
great
got
question.
hydrated. He got
Yeah.
this is gonna be a big answer. I'm ready for it.
One of my passions, Reece, like I was thinking about this. How do I describe some of my history? It was like year 3 in my career where I fell in love with QuickBooks. I was fascinated with QuickBooks. Wanted to learn the system in and out. It was kind of like the gateway drug of systems.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Totally.
So, and then you
Totally.
start learning about all uh, the great tools that can make the accounting and financial operations and payroll operations run that much more smoother.
Mm-hmm.
um so um I'll tell you, as a systems guy who's always been passionate about the systems, right? I'm tough to sell to.
Mm-hmm.
um uh I think one of my strengths, man of many talents, but trying to stay humble here. So let's table that. Let's forget. We're leaving egos at the door here, right? Right,
That's right.
Reece?
That's right.
So the what one of the reasons I chose to specialize in construction again, or
Mm-hmm.
not again, but to really, you know, dial in on construction is
Mm-hmm.
because, like, when we look back like 10 years ago, what was the
Mm-hmm.
gold standard for like an all-in-one solution? It was QuickBooks Desktop, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But man, no automation. Bank feeds are crap. The payrolls to DIY.
Mm-hmm.
um Shit, it requires your IT person to maintain the server, and
Yep.
you need to update the freaking thing manually, and all
Yeah.
that. That was the gold standard then. Then you know and obviously you guys have seen traction with adaptive. That's one of the tools, right?
Yeah. Sure.
That piqued my interest,
Yeah.
and many others. Now, clearly, you guys, the market is giving you some good reception, is
Yeah.
well deserved. Um, you, uh, but sometimes, and this is where see if we can put your money where your mouth is. Like,
Yeah.
if we're not here to plug adaptive, let's talk like just solutions. Sometimes adaptive
Yeah.
isn't the right solution.
Totally.
If all we need is payment rails,
Yeah.
right, and all we need is some automated AP,
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's a ramp.
Yeah.
Maybe it's an industry agnostic solution that's a little bit cheaper.
Yeah.
Clearly, when I think of like where the most value is for adaptive, going off on a little bit of a tangent here, yeah, you're completing draws from there.
Yeah.
What piqued my interest is that time solution. I mean, it's a sticking point. Payroll's been one of the areas where that when I think of two pain points in my line of work, right? It's the
Mm-hmm.
PM software is always the wild card. Sometimes there's PM software, sometimes there's not.
Sure.
The worst PM softwares are the ones that, the cost data has to originate in it.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no AP automation in there. There's no OCR
Exactly.
technology. There's no,
Some of it's getting
um,
there, but even then, the OCR, it's like a lot of it is when it's not an emphasis on the cost tracking and it is just OCR. It's like,
yeah,
what's the legitimacy of it? It's getting
yeah,
30% of the job done for me, right? And
yeah,
even 30% of us have to correct the hell out of it.
yeah. So, I mean, bringing it back, reeling it back in, some of the best tools out there, I try to pride myself on being a man of value and just sharing everything. I follow Gary
Totally,
Vee, and he says, tell the world what you know,
totally, totally.
and so I'm an Intuit guy,
Hmm.
so QuickBooks Online, not QuickBooks Desktop.
Yeah.
you know
Okay.
what's I'll you know I haven't made a final determination on it yet. I'm in the middle of getting my enterprise suite
Okay.
certification.
Yeah.
They've got my attention.
Yeah.
Okay, the fact that they've gone their first industry edition is for construction. Okay, you got my attention here, Andrew.
Yep.
Let's. But like I said, I'm tough to sell to, so I'm going to poke some holes in it. I'm not beholden to like referral agreements or anything like that. Like I don't give a crap. I'm good at my job because like I look at myself as a true fiduciary
Mm-hmm.
to the clients I work with. Um, so anyway, again, leaving ego at the door, some of the
Yeah.
better
Yeah.
solutions. Yeah. So
So IES,
adaptive, yeah.
adaptive. Go ahead.
Um, so QuickBooks Online, depending on what version, depending on what PM software, depending if we got adaptive in place, maybe we go down a level on the QBO subscription.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so one of my differentiators, some of the tools that I really geek out on, I'm a visual guy,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so like early on, I'd say 2019, I was really proud of it at the time, a full accounting, finance, HR, company policy manual.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like 32 pages, right?
Okay.
All narratives,
Mm-hmm.
you know. What I learned over the years is I can take that and put it into flowcharts,
Mm-hmm.
and more clearly communicate, what a process is,
Mm-hmm.
um, and update it. And so, like on the front end in mapping processes, I use a tool called Lucidchart.
Okay.
Um, Fairly affordable,
Mm-hmm.
I'd say easy to get. It's got a lot of bells and whistles in it, and of course, like all the solutions out there, it's got AI on top and all that.
Mm-hmm.
On the back end, again, staying with the visual theme, I like Fathom
Mm-hmm.
reporting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've seen the power of that in practice. Building out. It's fairly tedious to build out the dashboard or to build out the meaningful financial reports, the monthly financial reports
Mm-hmm.
for stakeholders, but the roll forward capability.
Yeah.
Once that version one is built out, I tell people, the real power of a lot of the value is rolling that forward month after month after month.
Mm-hmm.
Seamlessly connects to QuickBooks and all that.
Mm-hmm.
We can do consolidations. Can can throw in the job schedule, as a supplementary report.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so adaptive, definitely clearly from listening to your podcasts, it's got a lot of good traction. Folks find a lot of value in it. It checks a lot of the boxes
Mm-hmm.
in the accounting stack.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but at the end of the day, it's not a GL, at
Mm-hmm.
least yet.
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where, different folks will say, hey, it's, oh, and I get it. I have it too, especially in this age of AI, all the tools, the app fatigue
Mm-hmm.
and all that.
Totally. Totally.
Um, so I try to keep in mind, top of mind, keep things simple, right?
Mm-hmm.
As simple as possible, because at the end of the day, when you step back, you compare construction to other industries, it can get complicated quick,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we simplify as much as we can,
Mm-hmm.
including the overall tech stack. But my ethos is basically there's some folks that do their part really freaking well.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of finding a solution that's like a jack of all trades, maybe it's splitting instead of the all-in-one solution, we're going to 1, 2, 3
Yep.
to in key parts, right?
Yep.
Now payroll, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now the as part of a small team, we one of my favorite projects that I was a part of in my history was you know uh, trying to find solutions for the construction industry, the best solutions for the construction industry.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's different ways you can slice the subsectors in construction and whatnot, but like one of the industry reports that I follow, IBIS World, they classify, they had 37 sub industries under construction,
Mm-hmm.
right? And one of the challenges we had is, okay, what solutions would check all those boxes for all those industries? What construction specific solutions could fit in theory
Yeah.
into all theirs? So the payroll piece was the hardest.
Yeah.
Okay. Or one
You're
of
a
the
big
hardest.
MITRE guy, aren't you?
I am, and I'll tell you
Yes.
why.
Yeah.
Okay. For a few reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the so you talk a ton about cost codes, right?
Mm-hmm. Totally.
So
Yeah.
when we're looking at a business through the accounting realm, right?
Mm-hmm.
The QuickBooks product service item list should
Mm-hmm.
be your cost codes. It's not
Mm-hmm.
always,
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Mm-hmm.
Those are different. The product service item list in QuickBooks is different than your chart of accounts.
Totally.
Okay.
Yep.
Most payroll solutions, if they can job cost, okay, that transaction after you run payrolls coming into QuickBooks as a journal entry.
Mm-hmm.
Well, guess what? You can't code to a cost code in a journal entry. So what's one of the things that MITRE did? Well, MITRE realized, they did the research. They spent heavy. Okay, you had Connor on. I made sure I
Yep.
caught that
Yeah.
episode.
Connor's great.
Very fond of
Yeah.
you. So humble, almost too humble. All right.
Yeah. Sure.
Like I was listening to that podcast. I'm like, dude, you got to sell this better. You know, like because it's a standout solution, and they don't pay me. You guys don't pay me.
Yeah.
You know, like, hey, you might be best. I mean, today you're the best, but you may not always be the best. But like, so like that transaction at the end of the day, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like MITRE has a whole
Yes.
lot of bells and whistles. But that comes in as like a check transaction that gets
Yes.
put to your cost codes.
Yes.
Okay. They spent a whole lot of money on R&D to figure out the integrations.
Mm-hmm.
And as a systems guy, as an accountant, it's so often overlooked.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the data
Totally.
flowing. Like it's now I come with a bias, but it's just so frustrating, Reece.
Totally.
You know, historically. So when a solution gets it,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that, you know, integrating with all types of solutions, but not just anything, but good integrations, right? Meaningful
Yes.
ones. That's what made them stand out. Now I gotta call out Hammer. They're a little bit behind where MITRE is, a little bit younger, but you know, got to know their CEO as well, Breck. Great guy, doing great things. You know, they give you the option to come in, have that data hit the cost
Totally.
codes, or come in as a journal entry, right?
Totally.
So really into the technical weeds here, but that's one thing. The care in, so one of the things that stood out to me with MITRE as well was the because it was so easy to sell MITRE to folks who needed it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I got another payroll story at some point if we got time, but the so much in sales, it's like we want to start delivering. We want to overpromise. Like we want them to sign, and we want to get started. You know, like, and so we're rushing. Our hair's on fire. You know, I think MITRE. I sold one last year, and they're like, "Hey, it's going to be 3 months before we can fit you in to onboard and go live, to set a go live date."
Mm-hmm.
And so like that, they didn't want to overpromise, which was good.
They wanted it done right.
Yeah. And the support, you know, knowing that, especially with the payroll solution, you know, all solutions should have good human support.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. yes, we want to stay on the cutting edge of technology, but especially with payroll, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when you're going to have a technical problem come up,
Totally.
right? So
Totally.
those are things that I look for, so.
Well, and I think that's even translatable, even just back to the conversation of like what software solutions does the industry need to look at? How do they evaluate it? Do they have good systems in place? Like, do they even recognize their current workflows as being problematic? Is like, that's a lot of the value that I see service providers like you solving for, is recognizing the products that are building solutions around the workflow that is happening in that vertical. The cost code conversation with Mitre's Payroll, right? Coming in as a check transaction that you can categorize to a job in a cost code, and then that's going to show up in all of our reporting as well. Like, those are the pieces that are important to communicate to the industry, just like having a nice, tidy electrical box, right?
Amen.
Because those are the pieces that are valuable. And even if we're talking to a prospect in the early cycle and they have all of their cost codes ran into their chart of accounts, and they're doing that because they want job cost reporting on their P&Ls and they want to see how they're actually doing, but they're missing the point of having clean cost codes in your chart or in your products and services that feed into the appropriate chart of accounts, and then having a robust solution to show you more of the sub-ledger actions, the day-to-day estimates versus actuals, the percents that we're going to be paying, the over under billings, right? How does payroll come into this equation? Are we capturing all of it? Mm-hmm. That's what they need help with. And so I think just generally, like, what would be your piece of advice for somebody who might be listening to this podcast and saying, damn, Chris knows a lot here, but like, I need some help and someone to like dig through this with me? What would be some of the indicators or things that you would advise the industry to think about and then take action on to start moving down this better path?
You take inventory of your pain, and maybe it's not accounting, maybe it's something else, other part of your business, but let's say it is,
Mm-hmm.
Shit, I offer free consultations. My door's always open. Happy to have a conversation. Hey, if it leads somewhere, great. If it doesn't, just as great, like maybe best case, you've taken something away from the conversation.
Right.
At the end of the day, I try to lead with value.
Mm-hmm.
The money will follow. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, especially, seeing the caliber of some of your guests come on, mm-hmm. and just how candid they are. Right.
Yeah.
And just how much of an open book they are. Mm-hmm. It's a testament to, it keeps drawing me closer to the industry, because like, I want to be like that. I aspire to be like that.
Totally.
So, have a conversation. Hopefully this podcast kind of maybe it resonated something in you, mm-hmm. and, let's talk.
Totally.
So
beautiful. Well, Chris, I appreciate you sharing your wealth of knowledge here and spending some time talking to the fine contractors of America. Where is the best place for contractors to find you if they do want to just open up a conversation about what they can be doing better?
Sure. So 2 places you can reach out through my website, Breakaway CAAS, spelled CAAS.com. Mm-hmm. So breakawaycast.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, Chris J. Murphy, CPA, which, by the way, I'm a recovering CPA. So the not in the anyway. But those are the 2 best ways to find me. So
beautiful, awesome. Well, again, dude, I appreciate you jumping on, and we'll catch up soon, I'm sure.
Thanks for having me, Mr. Reece. Cool.
You bet. We'll see you, Chris.
See you, man.